Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
Before we begin, make sure you stay until the very end, because the moment William reportedly noticed an unexpected legal figure inside the Windsor gathering is where this story takes a dramatic turn. And if you enjoy royal stories filled with mystery, tension, and the moments that happen behind the palace walls, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment telling us what you think could have happened. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because according to the scenario surrounding this story, everything at Windsor appeared completely normal, until one unexpected arrival changed the atmosphere inside the room. Windsor has always carried a certain kind of silence. It is not the silence of an empty place, but the controlled quiet that surrounds a world where every movement can have meaning. Behind its historic walls, conversations can take place that the public may never hear. Decisions can be discussed without cameras, and even the arrival of one person can immediately change the mood of an entire room. On this particular occasion, the gathering was expected to be orderly and professional. There was no obvious indication that anything unusual was about to happen. People arrived, preparations were made, and the atmosphere seemed to suggest that the meeting would proceed exactly as planned. But then, according to the dramatic scenario at the heart of this story, Prince William noticed someone he was not expecting to see. At first, it may have seemed like nothing more than a routine arrival. A legal representative connected with Queen Camilla had reportedly appeared in the vicinity of the Windsor gathering, and there was no immediate reason for anyone outside the room to assume that this would become significant. Lawyers can be present for countless reasons. Royal institutions deal with legal matters, estates, communications, constitutional questions, family arrangements, and a wide range of administrative issues. The presence of a lawyer does not automatically mean that there is a crisis. Yet the mystery in this story is not simply that the lawyer was there. The mystery is what reportedly happened after William became aware of that presence. Imagine the scene. The meeting is underway. Conversations are taking place in measured voices. Everyone knows that royal gatherings are rarely casual affairs. There is protocol, there are expectations, and there is an understanding that certain subjects must remain private. William enters with the expectation that the day will follow a familiar pattern. But as his attention moves around the room, something catches his eye. Someone standing nearby is not simply another official or advisor. It is a lawyer whose presence is immediately recognizable. For a moment, nothing happens. Then William looks again. That second glance is where the tension begins. Of course, we should be careful here. There is no verified public evidence establishing that William actually ended a Windsor Summit after seeing Camilla's lawyer. This story is being presented as a dramatic speculative scenario, not as confirmed reporting. But within that scenario, the significance of the moment comes from the question it creates. Why would the presence of a lawyer attract William's attention so strongly? What could have been discussed before the meeting? Was the lawyer there for a completely routine matter? Or did William believe that the lawyer's presence suggested something more complicated? Those questions are precisely what make the situation so intriguing. The royal family operates under extraordinary public scrutiny. A normal family conversation can become a headline. A private meeting can generate months of speculation. Even a person entering a building can lead to questions about what is happening behind the scenes. That is why the appearance of a legal advisor can create such intense curiosity. People naturally begin searching for a reason. They want to know whether there was a disagreement, a legal issue, a communication problem, or simply a misunderstanding. But according to the dramatic scenario, William did not simply ignore the unexpected presence. Something changed. Perhaps it was subtle at first. A pause, a glance, a brief exchange with an aide. A moment in which the normal rhythm of the meeting seemed to disappear. Nobody in the room needed to announce that something was wrong. Sometimes tension does not need words. It can be felt in the way people stop speaking, in the way eyes move across the room, and in the way a previously relaxed atmosphere suddenly becomes controlled and cautious. And that is what allegedly happened next. William reportedly became more reserved. The conversations continued for a short time, but the energy had changed. Those present may have wondered whether the prince had received new information or whether he was simply reconsidering what he wanted to discuss in that setting. Whatever the reason, the meeting no longer felt routine. Then came the decision that transformed the entire story. William reportedly decided that the gathering should end. Think about what that would mean. A formal summit is not something that simply stops without a reason. Meetings of this nature are generally planned in advance. People organize schedules around them. Discussions are prepared. Participants arrive expecting to complete a specific agenda. Ending such a gathering unexpectedly would naturally lead to questions. And that is exactly where the mystery deepens. If the lawyer's appearance was completely ordinary, why would the meeting need to end? Perhaps there was another explanation. Perhaps William had already received information before arriving. Perhaps the lawyer was not the cause of the decision at all. Perhaps the timing was simply coincidental. Or perhaps, in this fictional scenario, William saw the lawyer and immediately realized that a conversation he expected to remain private was about to become something much more serious. The most interesting part is that none of these possibilities can be confirmed from the information available. And yet the speculation continues because the royal family has a long history of intense public fascination. Every unexplained pause becomes a potential clue. Every unusual meeting becomes a subject of discussion. Every legal representative who appears near a royal event can suddenly become part of a much larger narrative. But there is another layer to this story. Camilla's position within the royal family makes the presence of her legal advisors especially interesting to observers. The Queen's public role involves numerous institutional responsibilities, and legal advisors can naturally be involved in matters that have nothing to do with family conflict. That distinction is important. A lawyer appearing at Windsor does not prove that there was an argument between William and Camilla. It does not prove that there was a legal dispute. And it certainly does not prove that William was angry. Still, in the dramatic version of events, the reaction is what keeps people watching. Because William reportedly did not confront the lawyer publicly. Instead, he allegedly chose a different response. He ended the meeting. That decision, if it had happened, would be far more intriguing than an argument. A public confrontation would be obvious. Ending a meeting creates mystery. It leaves people wondering what was said, what was known, and what might have happened if the meeting had continued. And perhaps that is why the story has captured attention. There is no dramatic shouting match, no confirmed confrontation, no public accusation, just an unexpected presence, a reportedly changed atmosphere, and a sudden decision. Sometimes the quietest moments create the biggest questions. Inside Windsor, the room would have quickly adjusted to William's decision. Staff would have known that the schedule had changed. Participants would have understood that whatever had been planned would not continue in the same way. And outside the room, the public would have been left with almost nothing. No detailed explanation, no complete account, just speculation. And when information is limited, theories multiply. Some might argue that William simply needed to deal with another urgent matter. Others might wonder whether the lawyer had been there to discuss something sensitive. Some could interpret the situation as evidence of tension, while others would insist that there was nothing unusual about it at all. That uncertainty is important. Because the most dangerous thing in royal stories is turning speculation into certainty. A compelling story can be built around unanswered questions, but unanswered questions are not proof. So as we continue through this 6-part story, remember that the central event is a dramatic scenario rather than verified reporting. The purpose is to explore the possibilities and the atmosphere surrounding the claim, not to present an unconfirmed incident as established fact. And with that distinction made, the biggest question remains. Why was Camilla's lawyer there? That simple question could have an ordinary answer. Maybe there was paperwork. Maybe there was a legal matter requiring attention. Maybe the lawyer was simply attending another engagement. But if William's reported reaction in this scenario is accurate, then there may have been something about the timing that caught his attention. Because William would not need to react strongly to a lawyer simply because the person was a lawyer. Something else would have to matter: the timing, the circumstances, or perhaps the identity of the person. Imagine William receiving a quiet briefing before the meeting. Imagine him being told that everything was ready. Imagine him entering the room expecting one type of discussion, only to see someone connected to Camilla's legal team. Even if the presence were innocent, it could immediately change the questions he wanted answered. What had been discussed before he arrived? Who invited the lawyer? Was William expecting someone else? Was the lawyer carrying information? Or was the entire situation simply misunderstood? These are the questions that make the story so difficult to ignore. And then there is the most dramatic possibility of all. What if the decision to end the summit was not really about the lawyer? What if the lawyer's appearance merely revealed that something else had already changed? Perhaps William had learned something earlier that day. Perhaps an issue had emerged between different advisors. Perhaps the meeting agenda had suddenly become irrelevant. Or perhaps nothing dramatic happened at all, and the entire story grew from a simple scheduling decision. That possibility may sound less exciting, but it is also the reason viewers should remain cautious. Because royal stories often develop in the space between what is known and what people imagine. And right now, the space between those two things is where this story lives. Still, according to the scenario, one thing happened that nobody expected. William reportedly looked toward the lawyer. The meeting stopped progressing normally, and then came the decision to end the summit. But there is a detail we have not yet explored. What happened immediately after William made that decision? Who remained in the room? Who left? And most importantly, what could have been said privately after the public-facing portion of the gathering was over? Because if William truly wanted to avoid a public confrontation, ending the meeting may have been only the beginning. The real conversation could have happened somewhere else, behind another door, away from cameras, away from the public. And that is where the next part of this story becomes even more intriguing, because the lawyer's appearance may not have been the final development. It may have been the first clue. So before we move forward, tell us what you think. Was William's alleged decision simply a routine change of schedule? Or could the unexpected presence of Camilla's lawyer have signaled a much more sensitive conversation behind the scenes? Share your theory in the comments, because your interpretation could be completely different from the next possibility we examine. The moment William reportedly decided to bring the Windsor gathering to an abrupt end, the room would have been left with one unavoidable question. Why? Why would a meeting that had presumably been organized in advance suddenly lose its purpose? Why would the appearance of one legal representative create such a noticeable shift in the atmosphere? And perhaps most importantly, what was William thinking when he first noticed Camilla's lawyer? These questions are at the center of the dramatic scenario surrounding this story. But before going any further, it is important to make one thing clear. There is no verified public evidence establishing that William actually ended a Windsor Summit because he saw Camilla's lawyer. The events being explored here are presented as a speculative royal drama scenario, not as confirmed news. With that said, imagine the tension that would exist if such a moment had really unfolded behind the palace walls. The first thing people in the room would likely notice was not a dramatic confrontation, but the sudden uncertainty. Meetings of importance depend on momentum. People know why they are there, what needs to be discussed, and what is expected from them. When the person leading the gathering abruptly changes direction, everyone else has to adjust. Questions may remain unspoken, but they are still there. Was the meeting being postponed? Was it being moved somewhere else? Had William received an urgent message? Had someone introduced new information? Or had the unexpected presence of Camilla's legal representative changed the entire situation? In a royal environment where discretion is considered essential, people would not necessarily ask these questions openly. Instead, they would wait, watch, and try to understand what had just happened. According to the fictional scenario, William's reaction was controlled rather than explosive. That detail matters because a calm reaction can sometimes create more suspense than an angry one. If someone shouts, everyone knows there is a problem. But if someone becomes quiet, ends a meeting, and leaves without explanation, the mystery becomes much larger. There is no clear answer to explain the decision. There is only the sudden change itself. William could have simply walked away, leaving everyone wondering whether the lawyer's arrival was connected to the decision or whether another issue had emerged at exactly the same moment. And then comes the question of timing. Why would the lawyer arrive at that particular point? Was the appearance planned? Was it expected by someone else? Did William know in advance? Or was the lawyer's presence genuinely unexpected? Timing can change the meaning of an otherwise ordinary event. A lawyer appearing during a normal royal schedule is not necessarily unusual. But a lawyer appearing immediately before a meeting is suddenly cut short creates a story that naturally invites speculation. It creates a sequence. First the lawyer appears. Then William notices. Then the atmosphere changes. Then the meeting ends. Whether those events were actually connected is impossible to establish from the scenario alone, but the sequence is enough to generate questions. There is another possibility that deserves attention. What if William did not object to the lawyer personally? What if his concern was about what the lawyer represented? Legal advisors often carry information that cannot simply be discussed casually in a room filled with other people. They can represent institutions, individuals, estates, contracts, communications matters, and many other interests. Their presence can mean nothing dramatic, or it can signal that a conversation has entered a more sensitive phase. In this fictional scenario, William may have understood that the meeting was no longer the right setting for whatever discussion was taking place. Ending the summit could therefore have been less about anger and more about control. That interpretation changes everything. Instead of imagining William losing his temper, imagine him recognizing that something needed to be handled privately. Imagine him looking across the room, realizing that the circumstances were different from what he expected, and deciding that continuing would create more complications than ending the gathering. Such a decision could explain why the reaction, in this scenario, was reportedly sudden but controlled. The public might interpret it as a dramatic shutdown, while the person making the decision might see it as a simple attempt to prevent a sensitive discussion from happening in the wrong environment. But there is still one problem. If the issue was routine, why would the story attract so much attention? The answer may lie in the relationship between public perception and royal secrecy. The British royal family is constantly watched. People examine photographs, schedules, public appearances, facial expressions, seating arrangements, and even who enters a building. Because so much of royal life remains private, small details can become symbols. A lawyer at Windsor becomes more than a lawyer. A shortened meeting becomes more than a scheduling change. A glance becomes evidence in the minds of people looking for a hidden explanation. This does not mean those interpretations are correct. It simply explains why stories like this can grow rapidly. And William is particularly interesting in this context because his public image is often associated with restraint. He rarely needs to make a dramatic public statement to attract attention. A small change in behavior can generate enormous discussion. If he were to unexpectedly end a meeting, observers might immediately begin asking whether something had happened behind the scenes. Yet without a confirmed explanation, every theory would remain just that, a theory. Still, inside our fictional scenario, the situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The participants had expected a summit. Instead, they were now dealing with an interruption. The lawyer remained an important figure in the mystery, and William had apparently decided that continuing was not the right choice. But what happened after the meeting ended? That may be the most important part. Because ending a public gathering does not necessarily end the underlying issue. In fact, it can create an opportunity for a private conversation. If William had concerns about the lawyer's presence, he might have wanted clarification away from the larger group. If there was a misunderstanding, a private explanation could resolve it. If there was a genuine sensitive issue, privacy would become even more important. This is where the story becomes less about what happened in the room and more about what could have happened immediately afterward. Imagine the doors closing, the larger group dispersing, staff moving quietly through the corridors, and William remaining with a much smaller circle of advisors. At that point, the questions would become more direct. Who invited the lawyer? What was the lawyer there to discuss? Was Camilla aware of the situation? Had William been briefed beforehand? Was there a document involved? What if Camilla herself had not expected William to react this way? That would make the situation more complicated. Imagine her learning that William had ended the summit because of the lawyer's presence. She might naturally want to understand why. If she believed the lawyer's appearance was entirely legitimate, she might see William's reaction as unnecessary. If William believed he had not been properly informed, he might see the situation differently. Neither side would necessarily be wrong. They could simply have received different information. And that is how misunderstandings can develop even within highly organized institutions. One person believes everyone knows. Another person believes someone else has already explained it. A third person assumes the matter is routine. Then someone walks into a room and realizes that the assumptions were not shared. The result can be a sudden pause, a canceled meeting, and a private conversation. That is perhaps the most realistic explanation within the scenario. But the dramatic possibilities do not end there. What if the lawyer had brought information that William needed to consider before continuing? Perhaps the issue was not personal at all. Perhaps it involved the wider royal institution. Legal representatives can become involved in questions concerning communications, public statements, property, organizational responsibilities, and many other matters. The presence of legal counsel may simply indicate that accuracy and procedure are important. If William saw the lawyer and realized the conversation was moving into legal territory, he might reasonably decide that the meeting needed to be handled differently. That would explain why he allegedly ended the formal summit. Not because he was furious, not because he wanted to make a public statement, but because the discussion had changed. This distinction is critical. The phrase, "William suddenly ended the Windsor Summit," sounds dramatic. It creates an image of confrontation. But the reality, if such an event occurred, could have been much calmer. A leader can end a meeting because the circumstances have changed. There does not have to be shouting. There does not have to be anger. Sometimes ending a meeting is simply a way of protecting privacy, and perhaps that is what happened in our fictional scenario. William realized that the issue required a different setting. He ended the formal meeting. The people involved were separated, and the private discussion began. Now imagine the lawyer finally explaining the reason for the visit. Perhaps it was completely routine. Perhaps it was connected to a document that required attention. Perhaps the lawyer had been asked to clarify a legal point. William listens. The tension begins to disappear. The mystery seems to have an ordinary answer. But then one final question emerges. If the matter was routine, why had William not been informed earlier? That could be the real issue. Not the lawyer, not Camilla, not even the document. Communication. If William was expected to participate in a meeting involving legal matters, he would reasonably expect to know what kind of conversation he was entering. If he was not informed, even an innocent situation could create frustration. And perhaps the decision to end the summit was simply a way of saying, "We need to start again with everyone on the same page." That interpretation would make the story less sensational, but arguably more believable. Still, there is another layer. Royal institutions are constantly balancing public expectations with private responsibilities. A conversation that appears simple from the outside can have legal or institutional implications that the public cannot see. That is why it would be irresponsible to assume that a lawyer's appearance proves anything about a family dispute. There may be no conflict. There may be no scandal. There may be no secret confrontation. There may simply be a private matter being handled privately. And yet the human desire to understand what happens behind closed doors makes stories like this incredibly powerful. People want to know. They want the missing piece. They want the explanation that makes everything fit. But sometimes there is no dramatic explanation. Sometimes the truth is simply unavailable. And that may be the most important lesson from this entire story. Now let's return to the moment William reportedly saw the lawyer. At that instant, he could not have known how much speculation would eventually surround the encounter. He may have seen an ordinary professional. He may have seen someone he knew. He may have seen someone whose presence changed the nature of the meeting. Or perhaps, in reality, the moment never happened in the way the dramatic story describes it. That possibility must remain clear. Because without verified evidence, we cannot know what William thought, what Camilla knew, or why any meeting may have ended. What we can do is examine the possibilities. And among those possibilities, the strongest explanation may be that the presence of legal counsel signaled a need for privacy. If so, the summit's ending would not necessarily have been a rejection. It would have been a reset. A decision to pause the formal conversation until the relevant people could clarify the situation. That would also explain why there might have been no public confrontation afterward. If the matter was resolved privately, there would be little reason for a public statement, and that would leave observers with exactly what we have now: questions. No confirmed explanation, no dramatic confrontation, just a mysterious sequence of events. But perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that the lawyer's appearance was never intended to create tension at all. Maybe the entire situation was simply a misunderstanding that became larger because of the secrecy surrounding royal life. A routine legal meeting could become a royal mystery. A scheduling change could become a headline. A private conversation could become a theory. And a theory could eventually be presented online as if it were confirmed fact. That is why viewers should always ask an important question when watching dramatic royal stories. What do we actually know? In this case, we do not have verified evidence establishing that William ended a Windsor Summit because he saw Camilla's lawyer. We have a compelling scenario. We have questions. We have possibilities. But we do not have confirmation. And that distinction should remain at the center of the story. Still, the scenario leaves us with one final mystery. If William wanted the truth, did he get it? Imagine the final moments of the private conversation. The lawyer has explained the reason for being there. Camilla has provided her perspective. William has listened carefully. The confusion has either been resolved or it has not. If the explanation was satisfactory, the matter could end there. No announcement, no public confrontation, no dramatic statement, just another private chapter in the complicated world of royal life. But if William remained unconvinced, then the situation could have continued beyond the original meeting. Perhaps another conversation was arranged. Perhaps advisors became involved. Perhaps the issue was documented. Or perhaps everyone simply moved on. We do not know. And that is where this part of the story must end. Not with a claim that William was furious. Not with a claim that Camilla's lawyer caused a royal crisis. But with the realization that the most interesting part of the story may be the unanswered question itself. Why did the meeting reportedly end? Was it because of the lawyer? Was it because of something else? Was there a misunderstanding? Or was the entire sequence simply a dramatic interpretation of an ordinary event? The evidence available to the public does not provide a definitive answer, and perhaps that is exactly why the story continues to attract attention. Because Windsor has always represented something larger than a building. It represents history, tradition, secrecy, ceremony, and a royal institution that often operates beyond the view of the public. When something unusual is believed to happen behind those walls, people naturally want to know what it means. But sometimes the most responsible answer is simply, we don't know yet. And until reliable evidence emerges, speculation should remain speculation. So, as we prepare to move into the final chapter, remember the central question that has followed this story from the beginning. William sees Camilla's lawyer. The atmosphere changes. The summit reportedly ends. A private conversation follows. And the explanation remains uncertain. But what happened after that private conversation? Did everything return to normal? Did the participants quietly move forward? Or did the incident create a lasting change in the way the next royal meeting was handled? That is the final question we will examine. And if you have been following this story from the beginning, now is the time to tell us what you think. Was William reacting to the lawyer's presence, or to the information surrounding that presence? Was this potentially a serious private matter, a simple misunderstanding, or merely a dramatic story built around an unverified sequence of events? Leave your theory in the comments. And if you want more royal stories that separate the dramatic possibilities from the confirmed facts, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for the new video.